The morning bell rang across the galactic university. Students from different planets walked through the wide halls. Some had 6 legs, others had wings, and a few looked like walking crystals. But they all came here to learn. In classroom 7 Alpha, Professor Veltar stood at the front. He was tall and made of living crystal. His body sparkled blue and purple in the light. He had been teaching for over 300 years. Today, he would teach about survival on deadly planets. Today we study Cryos 9, Professor Veltar said. His voice sounded like wind blowing through ice caves. This planet kills everything that tries to live there. The students looked at the big screen. It showed a white planet covered in ice and snow. Storms moved across its surface like angry ghosts. The temperature numbers made everyone shiver just looking at them. Cryos 9 is cold, the professor continued. Very, very cold. The warmest day is minus 180 degrees. The storms carry ice that cuts like knives. No living thing has ever survived there without our best machines. A student with 4 arms raised one hand. Professor, what about shelters? Can't we build something? Professor Veltar's crystal body flashed with amusement. Good question, Zixta. Many species try to build shelters. The rock people of Granite 7 build stone houses. They freeze solid in 1 hour. The metal workers of Iron Prime make steel boxes. The cold breaks them like glass. He walked around the room, his crystal feet clicking on the floor. Even the tree folk of Greenworld who grow wooden homes cannot survive. Their wood becomes harder than metal, then breaks. In the back of the room, 2 human students sat together. Jiho Kim was 22 years old. He studied how to build things and fix machines. His black hair was messy because he always forgot to comb it. Next to him sat Nari Park, also 22. She studied how different people and creatures lived. Her long black hair was tied back neatly. Jiho whispered to Nari, "This professor thinks he knows everything." Nari nodded. "He talks like humans never built anything good." Professor Veltar heard them whisper. His crystal head turned toward them. Yes, the humans. Your species is interesting. You come from a warm planet with easy weather. You have tried to build ice shelters, I believe? Yes, sir, Jiho said. We call them igloos. The whole class laughed. Some students made sounds like giggling. Others buzzed or chirped their amusement. Professor Veltar's crystal body glowed brighter, with what looked like joy. Igloos, he said loudly. Yes, I have read about these. Small domes made of ice blocks. Very simple. Very basic. He paused for effect. And completely useless on a real ice planet like Cryos 9. Nari felt her face get hot with anger. Professor, have you ever seen how an igloo really works? My dear child, Professor Veltar said in a voice that sounded kind but wasn't really kind at all. I have studied survival for longer than your species has had space travel. I know about your ice huts. They might work on your warm little planet, but Cryos 9 would destroy them in minutes. But sir, Jiho said, standing up, have you actually tested that? Has anyone ever tried to build a real igloo on Cryos 9? The professor stopped walking. His crystal body went very still. Around the room, other students stopped talking. Even the ones who breathed gas instead of air seemed to hold their breath. Are you questioning my knowledge, young human? Professor Veltar asked. I'm asking if anyone has actually tried, Jiho said. His voice was calm, but Nari could see his hands shaking a little. Professor Veltar's crystal body started to glow red. This meant he was getting angry. Your species builds with mud and sticks and ice. We build with quantum fields and force barriers. Do you really think your primitive methods could work where our advanced technology fails? Maybe, Nari said, standing up next to Jiho. Sometimes old ways work better than new ways. The class went completely quiet. Nobody had ever challenged Professor Veltar like this. A student with tentacles instead of arms made a soft whistling sound that meant surprise in her language. Professor Veltar walked over to the 2 humans. He was much taller than them. His crystal body cast rainbow shadows on their faces. Very Well, he said slowly, if you believe your ice huts are so wonderful, perhaps we should test this theory. What do you mean? Jiho asked. A practical demonstration, the professor said. His crystal body was now glowing bright white. You will go to Cryos 9. You will try to survive for 3 days using only your primitive methods. No advanced heaters, no force fields, no quantum shelters, just you, some basic tools, and your igloos. Nari felt her heart start beating faster. You want us to actually go to Cryos 9? Unless you are afraid? Professor Veltar asked. Unless you admit that human methods are not as good as you claim? The other students started talking excitedly. Some were making bets on how long the humans would last. A student that looked like a giant insect clicked his legs together, which meant he was very interested in what would happen. Jiho looked at Nari. She looked back at him. They both knew this was very dangerous. Cryos 9 was known as one of the most deadly planets in the galaxy, but they also knew something the professor didn't know. We accept, Jiho said. Excellent, Professor Veltar said. His crystal body was now so bright it hurt to look at him. We will arrange transport to Cryos 9 tomorrow. The survival test will last 3 days. You may bring basic tools and emergency food, no advanced technology. He walked back to the front of the class. Class, this will be a wonderful learning experience. We will watch as these humans learn that confidence is not the same as ability. As the class ended and students began to leave, many of them came over to talk to Jiho and Nari. Most of them seemed worried. Are you crazy? Asked Toru, a student, who looked like a large praying mantis. Cryos 9 kills everything. The professor is very smart, said Kira, a student made of purple gas who floated instead of walking. If he says igloos won't work, maybe they won't work. But Jiho and Nari just smiled. Thanks for worrying about us, Nari said. But we know something the professor doesn't know. What's that? Toru asked. He's never actually tried to build a real igloo, Jiho said. He just thinks he knows how they work. As they walked out of the classroom, Professor Veltar watched them go. He was already planning the rescue mission he was sure he would need to save the foolish humans. But if he had looked more carefully, he might have noticed that Jiho and Nari weren't scared. They were excited. They had spent their whole lives hearing aliens say that human ways were primitive and useless. Tomorrow, they would prove that sometimes old ways are the best ways. Word spread fast through the galactic university. By dinner time, everyone knew about the challenge. Students talked about it in the cafeteria, in the halls, and in their rooms. Most of them thought the humans were crazy. I give them 2 hours, said a student with blue skin and 3 eyes. He was eating something that looked like purple soup. 2 hours? That's too long, laughed another student who had scales instead of skin. I think 30 minutes before they call for help. But not everyone was making jokes. Some students were worried about their human friends. In the human dormitory, Jiho and Nari sat in Jiho's small room. Books and papers covered his desk. His computer screen showed pictures of Cryos 9 and information about ice and cold weather. Look at this, Nari said, pointing at her tablet. The temperature on Cryos 9 can drop to minus 220 degrees. That's colder than anything on Earth. I know, Jiho said. But look at this ice data. The ice on Cryos 9 is different from Earth ice. It's harder and more like metal. But the basic rules of building with ice should still work. Nari was reading old Earth books about people who lived in very cold places. The Inuit people lived in places almost as cold as Cryos 9. They survived for thousands of years using igloos. The professor thinks an igloo is just ice blocks stacked up, Jiho said. He doesn't understand the science. Exactly, Nari agreed. He doesn't know about the spiral shape that makes the dome strong. He doesn't know how body heat warms the inside. He doesn't know how the ice walls work to keep heat in. They worked late into the night. Jiho studied the physics of heat and cold. He learned about how different types of ice behaved. He calculated how thick the walls needed to be and what shape would work best on Cryos 9. Nari studied the history of Arctic survival. She read about how humans had lived in frozen places for thousands of years. She learned about breathing holes, entrance tunnels, and how to keep carbon dioxide from building up inside. The next morning, other students came to visit them. Toru, the mantis-like student, brought them breakfast. "You don't have to do this," he said. His big bug eyes looked worried. "Everyone will understand if you change your mind." "Thanks, Toru," Nari said, "but we're not changing our minds." Kira, the purple gas student, floated into the room. "I talked to some older students. They said Professor Veltar has never been wrong about survival. Maybe he knows something you don't know." "Maybe," Jiho said. "But maybe we know something he doesn't know." More students came to visit. Some brought gifts of food or good luck charms from their home planets. Others just wanted to say goodbye, thinking they might not see the humans again. A student with rock-like skin said, "My people tried to survive on an ice planet once. We all nearly died, even with our stone shelters." "Your people build with stone," Nari explained. "Stone gets very cold and stays cold. Ice is different. When you build with ice the right way, it actually helps keep you warm." The rock student looked confused. "How can ice keep you warm?" "You'll see," Jiho said with a smile. At noon, they went to the equipment room. Professor Veltar was there, watching them choose their supplies. His crystal body was glowing a cold blue color. "Choose carefully," he said. "Your life depends on these tools." Jiho picked simple cutting tools, nothing fancy or high-tech. He chose a basic ice saw, some small knives and measuring tools. He also picked warm clothes and emergency food for 3 days. "That's all?" Professor Veltar asked. "No thermal generators, no force field projectors, no emergency heaters?" "We don't need them," Nari said. She was packing her own supplies. She chose similar tools plus some rope and a few medical supplies. "Foolish," the professor muttered. His crystal body flashed red for a moment. "I have arranged for emergency rescue. When you activate your distress beacon, we will come to save you immediately." "We won't need rescue," Jiho said. Other students gathered to watch them pack. Most looked worried. A few looked excited to see what would happen. "I still think you're crazy," Toru said. "But I hope you prove the professor wrong." "We will," Nari said confidently. The transport ship was waiting at the spaceport. It was a small, fast ship designed for dangerous missions. The pilot was a being, with silver skin and no visible eyes. "I've been to Cryos 9 many times," the pilot said. "I've never brought anyone there to live on the surface. Usually I just drop scientific equipment and leave quickly." "How quickly?" Jiho asked. "Very quickly," the pilot said. "The storms can damage ships. The cold can freeze fuel lines. It's not a place for living things." Professor Veltar came aboard, the ship with several other teachers. They would watch the test from orbit. "Last chance to quit," he said to the humans. "No one will think less of you for using your common sense." "Thanks, Professor," Nari said. "But we're ready." As the ship left the university and headed toward Cryos 9, the humans looked out the window at the stars. Other students had come to the observation deck to wave goodbye. Some held signs wishing them luck. "Look," Jiho said, pointing at a sign that read, "Humans are awesome," in 5 different alien languages. "At least some people believe in us," Nari said. Professor Veltar sat at the front of the ship with the other teachers. They were setting up monitoring equipment to watch the test. "How long do you think they'll last?" asked Professor Zindar, who taught mathematics. 4 hours, Professor Veltar said. "Maybe 6 if they're very lucky." "What if they actually succeed?" asked Professor Yelna, who taught alien psychology. Professor Veltar's crystal body dimmed. "Impossible. I've studied survival for centuries. Primitive ice shelters cannot work on Cryos 9. But as he said this, he felt a small worry in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if these young humans knew something he didn't know? The ship's computer announced, "Approaching Cryos 9, surface. Temperature minus 190 degrees. Wind speed 200 kilometers per hour. Ice storm probability 85%. Through the window they could see the planet. It looked like a giant white ball covered in swirling clouds. Lightning flashed inside the storms, but it was cold. Lightning made of ice crystals instead of electricity. It looks angry, Nari whispered. It looks like home, Jiho said, thinking of winter on Earth. The pilot began preparing for landing. I'll drop you at the designated survival zone. It's a flat area protected from the worst storms. But even there, the conditions are deadly. We understand, the humans said together. Professor Veltar stood up. His crystal body was glowing bright white now. Students, you are about to land on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Your species has never faced anything like this. Are you absolutely certain you want to continue? Jiho and Nari looked at each other. They thought about all the alien students who said humans were weak. They thought about all the times they'd been told their ways were primitive and useless. Professor, Nari said, our ancestors survived ice ages with nothing but animal skins and stone tools. We think we can handle one little ice planet. As the ship began its descent toward the surface of Krios 9, everyone on board felt the temperature dropping. Even inside the heated ship, the cold seemed to creep through the walls. The adventure was about to begin. The ship touched down on Krios 9 with a loud thump. Ice and snow flew everywhere as the landing engines melted the frozen ground. Through the thick windows, everyone could see the alien world waiting outside. It looked like death itself. The wind howled around the ship like a living monster. Snow blew sideways in sheets so thick they couldn't see more than a few meters. The ground was covered in ice that sparkled like broken glass under the ship's lights. Surface temperature is now minus 185 degrees, the pilot announced. Wind speed is 150 kilometers per hour. The storm will get worse tonight. Professor Veltar moved to the window and looked out. His crystal body flickered with cold blue light. Even I would not survive out there without protection, he said. And I am made of living crystal. Jiho and Nari put on their thick winter clothes. They had learned about layering from their research. First came thin base layers to keep sweat away from their skin, then warm middle layers to trap heat, finally outer layers to block wind and snow. Ready? Jiho asked Nari. Ready, she replied. They put on their face masks and gloves. The breathing masks would warm the air before it reached their lungs. Without them, the cold air would freeze their lungs solid in seconds. Wait, Professor Veltar said. Before you go, let me make sure you have emergency supplies. He handed them a small device. This is a distress beacon. Press the button and we will rescue you immediately. Thanks, Nari said, putting the beacon in her pocket. But we won't need it. The ship's door opened. The cold hit them like a giant hammer made of ice. Even through all their warm clothes, they could feel Krios 9 trying to steal their body heat. Good luck, called Toru from inside the ship. Please don't die. We won't, Jiho shouted back, though the wind almost stole his words. They stepped onto the planet's surface. Their boots crunched through snow that was harder than concrete. Each step took effort, because the snow was so deep and packed. The ship door closed, behind them with a solid thunk. Suddenly they were alone on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Look for the right kind of ice, Nari shouted over the wind. We need blocks that are solid but not too hard to cut. They walked around the landing area, testing different patches of ice with their tools. Most of the ice was too soft. It would fall apart when they tried to build with it. Some was too hard. It would break their cutting tools. Here, Jiho called. He had found a section where the wind had packed the snow into dense, solid ice. This should work. The ice was perfect. It was hard enough to make strong blocks but soft enough to cut with their tools. It had the right crystalline structure to hold together when stacked. Working quickly, they began cutting blocks. Each block had to be exactly the right size and shape. Too big, and they couldn't lift it. Too small, and the wall would be weak. Remember, the spiral, Nari said as they worked. Each row has to lean in just a little bit. The cutting was hard work. The alien ice was tougher than Earth ice. Their tools grew cold and became harder to hold, but they kept working, block by block. Above them, the ship hovered in the sky. Professor Veltar and the other teachers watched through their instruments. Their body temperature is dropping, reported Professor Zindar. They're losing heat fast. As expected, Professor Veltar said. No shelter can hold heat in these conditions. But down on the surface, Jiho and Nari were building something the professor had never seen before. A real igloo, built the right way, using knowledge passed down through thousands of years. The first row of blocks formed a circle about 3 meters across. Each block leaned inward slightly. The second row leaned in a little more. Row by row, the dome began to take shape. "It's working," Nari said. Even though they were working hard, she was starting to feel warmer. The shelter was blocking the wind, and their body heat was beginning to be trapped inside. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped even more. The ship's instruments showed -200 degrees outside. Ice crystals in the air became so thick they looked like fog. "They should be freezing solid by now," Professor Veltar muttered. "Why are they still moving?" Jiho placed the final capstone block at the top of the dome. The igloo was complete. A perfect dome of ice blocks, each one supporting the others. But they weren't finished yet. Nari was digging an entrance tunnel. The tunnel had to slope down, then up to create a cold trap. Cold air would sink into the tunnel and stay there, while warm air would rise and stay inside the dome. "Almost done," she panted. The hard work was keeping her warm, but she knew they needed to get inside soon. Finally, they crawled through the tunnel and into their igloo. The difference was immediate. The howling wind became a quiet whisper. The biting cold became merely cool. They pulled out their emergency heater, not a fancy machine, just a small camping stove. They lit it and placed it carefully in the center of the igloo. "Look," Jiho said, pointing at the walls. Something amazing was happening. Their breath and body heat were making the inside surface of the ice walls melt just a tiny bit. This thin layer of water immediately froze again, creating a smooth, shiny surface that actually helped insulate the igloo. "It's just like the old book said," Nari whispered. "The igloo is making itself better." The temperature inside began to rise, -20 degrees, -10, then, amazingly, 0 degrees. Above freezing, warm enough to survive. On the ship above, alarms began beeping. "Impossible," Professor Veltar exclaimed. "The instruments must be broken." "I checked them twice," Professor Zindar said. "The readings are correct. The inside of their shelter is 30 degrees warmer than the outside air. But that's impossible. No simple ice structure can insulate that well." Down in the igloo, Jiho and Nari ate their emergency rations and prepared to sleep. They had sleeping bags rated for extreme cold, but inside the igloo they barely needed them. "I can't believe it's working this well," Nari said. "The professor doesn't understand," Jiho replied. "He thinks an igloo is just ice blocks stacked up. He doesn't know about the thermal dynamics, the air circulation, the way the dome shape distributes weight. He doesn't know that ice is actually a good insulator when you use it right," Nari added. Outside, the storm grew worse. Wind speeds reached over 200 kilometers per hour. The temperature dropped to -220 degrees. Cold, enough to freeze carbon dioxide solid. But inside their simple ice dome, 2 humans slept peacefully. Their shelter, built with tools and techniques thousands of years old, kept them safe and warm. Professor Veltar stayed awake all night, staring at his instruments. Everything he knew about survival said the humans should be dead. But they weren't. Just alive, they seemed comfortable. "Maybe," he whispered to himself, "maybe I don't know everything after all." The first day on Krios 9 was ending. The humans had survived. But the real test was still to come. Dawn came slowly on Krios 9. The sky was gray and full of ice crystals that sparkled like tiny diamonds. But something was wrong. The wind was getting stronger. Inside the igloo, Jiho woke up first. He could hear the storm growing louder outside. The wind sounded like a giant monster roaring with anger. "Nari," he whispered, shaking his friend awake. "Listen." Nari opened her eyes and heard the terrible sound. The wind was howling so loud it made their ears hurt, even inside the thick ice. "Walls, that's not a normal storm," she said. Above them in the ship, alarms were ringing. The pilot was trying to keep the ship steady as massive winds pushed it around like a toy. "We need to move higher," the pilot shouted. "This storm is too dangerous." Professor Veltar looked at his instruments. His crystal body was flashing red. With worry. Wind speed is now 300 kilometers per hour. Temperature is minus 220 degrees. This is the worst storm Cryos 9 has seen in 50 years. What about the humans? Asked Professor Yelna. They cannot survive this, Professor Veltar said. Nothing survives storms like this. We must prepare for emergency rescue. But down on the surface, something amazing was happening. As the storm grew stronger, it actually helped the igloo. Wind-blown snow piled up around the dome, making the walls thicker. The extra snow acted like a blanket, making the igloo even warmer inside. Look at this, Jiho said, checking the air holes they had made for breathing. The storm is sealing the small gaps between our ice blocks. It's making our shelter better. The old books were right again, Nari said. Inuit people said storms sometimes helped igloos by adding extra insulation. The temperature inside their shelter was now actually above freezing. They took off their heavy coats and sat in just their warm shirts. Outside, the planet was trying to kill everything with cold and wind. Inside, they were comfortable. I'm getting hungry, Nari said, but we're running low on food. They had brought 3 days of emergency rations, but the hard work of building the igloo had made them hungrier than expected. If they ate normally, they would run out of food before the test ended. Wait, Nari said, remembering something from her studies. What about ice fishing? Ice fishing? Jiho looked confused. There's no water here. Everything is frozen solid. Maybe not everything, Nari said. She pulled out her tablet and showed him the geological surveys of Cryos 9. Look at this. The planet has underground water pockets, places where the water stays liquid because of heat from the planet's core. Jiho studied the data. You're right. There should be liquid water about 2 meters below the surface, right? There, he pointed to a spot near the back of the igloo. But how do we get to it without destroying our shelter? Nari asked. Jiho thought for a moment. We make a fishing hole inside the igloo. We dig down through the floor. It was risky. If they made a mistake, cold air could rush in through the hole and freeze them. But they were getting hungry, and they needed to prove they could survive completely on their own. Using their cutting tools, they carefully made a small hole in the floor of the igloo. They dug down through the hard ice, taking turns because the work was tiring. 1 meter down, still solid ice. 1.5 meters down. The ice was getting softer. 2 meters down. Suddenly, Jiho's tool broke through into empty space. Water, he shouted. There's actually water down here. Dark liquid water bubbled up through the hole. It was very cold, but it was still liquid. And in the water, they could see small moving shapes. Life, Nari gasped. There's life in this water. They had discovered something the alien scientists had missed. Cryos 9 wasn't completely dead. In the underground water pockets, simple life forms had survived. Using a piece of rope and a bent tool as a hook, Jiho lowered a line into the water. Within minutes, he caught something that looked like a small fish, but with 6 fins instead of 4. Is it safe to eat? Nari asked. Let's cook it first, Jiho said. Heat kills most dangerous things. They cooked the strange fish over their small camping stove. It tasted like fish from Earth, but with a slightly metallic flavor. It was actually quite good. We just solved the food problem, Nari said, catching another fish. And we discovered new life forms that nobody knew existed. Above them, the ship's instruments were going crazy. The storm was so strong that the monitoring equipment could barely track the humans through all the interference. I can't get clear readings, Professor Zindar reported. The storm is blocking our sensors. They must be dead by now, Professor Veltar said. No shelter can survive winds this strong. The ice blocks would be blown apart. But he was wrong. The igloo was stronger than ever. The dome shape deflected the wind perfectly. The storm's fury passed over and around the shelter like water flowing around a rock. Inside, Jiho and Nari were not just surviving, they were thriving. They had food, water, warmth, and shelter. They had even made an amazing scientific discovery. The professor was wrong about so many things, Nari said as she cooked another fish. He said this planet was lifeless. He said ice shelters couldn't work. He said we would die in hours. He based everything on assumptions, Jiho replied. He never actually tested his theories. He just thought that because something was old or simple, it couldn't work. The storm raged for hours. Lightning made of ice crystals flashed through the sky. The wind howled like all the ghosts in the galaxy crying at once. The temperature dropped so low that it broke the ship's instruments, but inside their ancient shelter, built with knowledge passed down for thousands of years, 2 humans sat comfortably. They ate fresh fish, drank clean water, and stayed warm while the worst storm in 50 years tried to destroy everything on the planet's surface. "You know what's funny?" Nari said. "What?" "The professor's advanced thermal generators probably couldn't work in this storm. The wind would blow them away. The cold would freeze their fuel lines, his force fields would fail when ice crystals jammed the projectors. But our igloo just gets stronger," Jiho said. "The storm helps it instead of hurting it." As night fell again, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind dropped from 300 kilometers per hour to only 200. The temperature rose from minus 220 degrees to minus 200. Up in the ship, Professor Veltar stared at his clearing instruments in disbelief. The humans were still alive. Not just alive. Their heat signatures showed they were actually comfortable. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Everything I know about survival says they should be dead." "Maybe," said Professor Yelna quietly. "Everything you know about survival is wrong." For the first time in his 300-year career, Professor Veltar began to doubt himself. These primitive humans with their simple ice blocks had survived the worst storm Cryos 9 could throw at them, and they had done it using nothing but ancient knowledge and basic tools. Tomorrow would be their final day. But already, they had proven something that would change how the galaxy thought about survival, about humans, and about the power of old wisdom in a high-tech universe. The third day on Cryos 9 dawned clear and bright. For the first time since they arrived, the wind was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of sparkling white ice and blue shadows. Inside the igloo, Jiho and Nari woke up feeling warm and rested. They had slept well, even though they were on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. "Final day," Nari said, stretching. "We made it." "Not just made it," Jiho said with a smile. "We lived comfortably. We found new life forms. We proved that old ways can be better than new ways." They packed their few belongings and prepared for pickup. But first they wanted to do something special. They decided to catch more of the strange fish and preserve them as proof of their discovery. Up in the ship, Professor Veltar was very quiet. He had watched his instruments all night. The humans had not only survived the worst storm in 50 years, they had been comfortable the entire time. "Prepare for surface landing," he told the pilot. "It's time to see what impossible thing these humans have accomplished." The other professors were excited too. Professor Yelna kept checking the readings. "Their heat signatures show they've been warm for 3 days straight. How is that possible with just ice blocks?" "I don't know," Professor Veltar admitted. For the first time in centuries, he felt confused and uncertain. "I don't understand how they did it." The ship landed near the igloo with a soft thump. Snow and ice blew away from the landing engines. Through the ship's windows, everyone could see the small dome of ice blocks sitting peacefully on the white ground. "It looks so simple," Professor Zindar said. "Just a pile of ice." "That's what I thought too," Professor Veltar said quietly. The ship's door opened. Professor Veltar stepped out onto the planet's surface, followed by the other teachers. Even with their advanced environmental suits, they could feel the terrible cold trying to reach them. Jiho and Nari crawled out of their igloo through the entrance tunnel. They stood up, brushed snow off their clothes, and smiled at their professors. "Good morning, Professor Veltar," Nari said cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Professor Veltar stared at them. They looked healthy and happy. Their faces were pink from warmth, not blue from cold. They moved easily, not stiff from freezing. "How?" was all he could say. "How what, Professor?" Jiho asked. "How are you alive? How are you warm? How did you survive the storm? How is any of this possible?" Jiho and Nari looked at each other and smiled. "Would you like us to show you?" Nari asked. They led the professors around their igloo, explaining everything. They showed how each ice block was cut to exactly the right shape. They explained how the spiral construction made the dome incredibly strong. See how each block leans in slightly? Jiho pointed out. This creates a dome that supports its own weight. The more weight you put on it, the stronger it becomes. And look at the entrance tunnel, Nari added. It slopes down, then up. Cold air sinks down into the tunnel and stays there. Warm air rises and stays inside the dome. Professor Veltar listened carefully. As an expert in survival, he began to understand the science behind what he was seeing. The dome shape deflects wind, he said slowly. The ice walls provide thermal mass to store heat. The entrance design creates a thermal barrier. Exactly, Nari said. And that's not all. Come see what we discovered. They led the professors inside the igloo. Professor Veltar had to crawl through the entrance tunnel, which was embarrassing for someone of his status. But once inside, he gasped in amazement. The inside of the igloo was actually warm. His instruments showed the temperature was above freezing. After 3 days in one of the coldest places in the galaxy, these humans had created a comfortable living space using nothing but ice and basic tools. This is remarkable, he whispered. Look at this, Jiho said, pointing to the fishing hole they had made. We found liquid water and life forms that your surveys missed. In a container, they had several of the strange six-finned fish they had caught. Life forms? Professor Zindar knelt down to examine the fish. But our instruments showed this planet was completely dead. Your instruments scanned from orbit, Nari explained. They couldn't detect life in the underground water pockets. We only found it because we needed food and remembered how humans used to fish through ice. Professor Veltar stood in the middle of the igloo, turning slowly to look at everything. The smooth ice walls that reflected and trapped heat. The perfect dome shape that distributed weight evenly. The simple but effective ventilation system. The fishing hole that had led to a major scientific discovery. I have been wrong, he said quietly. Completely and utterly wrong. The other professors looked shocked. Professor Veltar was famous for never admitting mistakes. Sir? Professor Yelna asked. I assumed that because human technology was simple, it was inferior. Professor Veltar continued. I thought that newer was always better. I believed that primitive meant useless. He looked at Jiho and Nari with new respect in his crystal eyes. But you have proven something I never considered. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most elegant. Sometimes working with nature is better than fighting against it. Sometimes simple is better than complex. Jiho and Nari felt proud, but also humble. They hadn't tried to embarrass their professor. They had just wanted to prove that human knowledge had value. Professor, Nari said gently, we didn't do this to make you wrong. We did it to show that all species have wisdom to share. Yeah, Jiho added. Your people have amazing crystal technology. The rock people have incredible stone knowledge. The metal workers understand alloys better than anyone. Every species is good at something. Professor Veltar's crystal body began glowing with a warm, golden light. This was how his people showed deep emotion and respect. You are wise as well as resourceful, he said. I would like to ask you something. What? Both humans asked. Would you teach a class at the university? Would you show other students how to build these igloos? Would you help me create a new course about traditional survival methods from all species? Jiho and Nari looked at each other in amazement. They had come to this planet to prove a point. Now they were being asked to become teachers themselves. We would be honored, Nari said. But first, Jiho said with a grin, we need to catch some more fish. The university cafeteria should try these. They're actually quite tasty. As they prepared to leave Cryos 9, word of their success spread throughout the ship and back to the university. By the time they returned, hundreds of students were waiting to hear their story. Professor Veltar stood before the assembled crowd in the main auditorium. His crystal body glowed with pride and humility mixed together. Students, he announced, Today I learned that wisdom is not about having the most advanced technology. Wisdom is about understanding that every culture, every species, every tradition has something valuable to teach us. He gestured to Jiho and Nari, who stood beside him looking slightly embarrassed by all the attention. These humans have shown us that a simple shelter, built with ancient knowledge and basic tools, can outperform our most advanced systems. They have discovered new life forms that our sophisticated instruments missed. Most importantly, they have taught us humility. The crowd erupted in cheers. Students from dozens of different species applauded, whistled, buzzed, and made whatever sounds their people used to show approval. From that day forward, the Galactic University included human survival techniques in its curriculum. Students learned to build igloos alongside quantum shelters. They studied traditional knowledge as carefully as they studied advanced technology. And Professor Veltar, the crystal being who had once believed that newer was always better, became the strongest supporter of learning from all species, no matter how old or simple their methods might seem. Jiho and Nari became the first humans to receive the university's highest honor for survival innovation. But more importantly, they had opened the galaxy's mind to a simple truth. Sometimes the best solutions are also the oldest ones.